Welcome back to the book club. Today I'm reviewing the book Bastion by Phil Tucker. This is book one of his Immortal Great Soul series, of which there's currently only 2 books out right now. And this is a progression fantasy series that I've seen recommended in a lot of places where people are asking for books similar to Cradle by Will White. For this review, I'm going to be not giving any spoilers for the book. I may talk about some events that happened super early on, but I don't want to give away any major plot points. So I'm just going to be talking very high level about the characters and that kind of thing. I'm going to be talking about my rating of the plot, the characters, the pacing of the book, and then finally, will I continue reading it? There's only one more book out right now for the series, but maybe by the time I get around to book 2, the 3rd book will come out. I'm not exactly sure when that's planned at the moment. So to start off, before I dive into the plot or the characters, or whatever, I will say that overall, I was a bit disappointed by this book. You know, in the thumbnail, I'm probably going to have my ratings, so you'll see what I'm about to say, ratings wise, anyways. But I was definitely a bit disappointed in this book. I think that in the search for drugs like Cradle, this kind of fell flat. I think that maybe if I didn't have in my mind that this was going to be super similar to Cradle, or like I just tampered my expectations a bit, I may have actually ended up enjoying it a bit more. But I think that I had in my brain that this was going to be something that was like Cradle, and there was a lot of slow points in the book that sort of dragged it down, and I was really considering whether or not it was worth finishing reading. So I'll talk about that a bit more in the pacing section, but for now, let me just dive into what I thought about the plot. So overall, I'm rating the plot a 6. My rating for this is a little bit of a meme, but also it is kind of serious. So it does truly reflect how I feel about the book, which was that it was kind of mid, but also like cool and interesting in some ways. So the plot, I give a 6. I think that the world building was really unique and intriguing. The idea that like there's these great souls that are that have died on Earth and put their soul into this like spire thing, and then they get reborn over and over again to try to take down hell and become the Infernarch or something like that. It's a very cool premise. It's a very cool world. I think that Bastion being the city within hell that's sort of like in a little bubble is neat. I think the progression system that Phil came up with is also pretty neat. I was interested in learning more about it throughout the entire book. I'm interested in learning more about it in the future. And I also think that a lot of the battle scenes are pretty well written. Actually, overall, the book is pretty well written. I think that sometimes progression fantasy falls into these like, there's a lot of like very immature writing in progression fantasy from what I've read and from what I've seen. And I will say that like Phil Tucker's writing is actually really good. I do notice that there's like certain words that he uses over and over again, like sluiced, which like you don't see that often, but there's clearly some like pet words that he has that he likes throwing in there. Often also limned, Limned, which is like outlined. There's a few words that I kept picking up on that he really liked using, but besides noticing those things, I think overall it was very well written. I think the battle scenes were very cool. I also think that the ending was a very interesting subversion of expectations that I was really hoping for. I will say that I finished the book this morning. Last night I read up to, I think, like 95%. I was reading on my Kindle. I was like 95% of the way through. And as I was going to bed, I was actually thinking this out loud, or in my mind, but I was just thinking, please subvert my expectations. Please subvert my expectations. Like, do something in the ending. I like hope this last 5% does something different, because if not, I'm going to be very mad. And I can confidently say that my expectations were subverted, and it took a lot longer than I wanted to get there. But the ending payoff was actually pretty neat. Unfortunately, the reason why, I'm saying all these good things, but I still rated it a 6. Most of the actual plot is, hey, so the main character's name is Scorio. A lot of the plot is, no, Scorio, don't do that. It's too dangerous. You're going to hurt yourself. There must be another way. You can't just do all these crazy things to acquire power. Like, you can play it safe. It'll be fine. And then Scorio ignores it. He does it anyways. And then he succeeds with the cost. That happens like 20 times throughout the book. And it's one of the reasons why I thought the book was kind of hard to get through, and one of the reasons why last night I went to bed begging that Phil Tucker would subvert my expectations, because so much of the book was so predictable. Every time there was a problem, you knew exactly what Scorio was going to do about it. he would always think, oh, I shouldn't do this. It'd be super crazy. I'm going to do it anyways. And then like it happens and it works out kind of, but there's a cost and blah, blah, blah. Because of this like predictability of the plot, it really dragged down my enjoyment of the book. But also that situation didn't just happen 2 or 3 times. It happened like literally 20 times. It just kept happening over and over and over again. And there's a couple plot events that happened in the middle that were like a little bit different and interesting and added more world building and stuff. But like a lot of the meat of the book was just the same cycle of, you know, oh no, I shouldn't do this because it's going to like, this is a bad idea. Oh, I'm going to let my anger take over and do it anyways. Oh no, I hurt myself. My heart is worse now, blah, blah, blah. It just like, it got tiring. It got boring. It was hard to push through. So overall, that's sort of where I'm taking away all these points from the plot. And next up for the characters, I'm also giving this a 6. And the main reason here is a lot of the side characters are, at least in this first book, very one-dimensional. Now this isn't a small book. This is an 800-page book, 820 something pages. You would think that in a book that long there would be more than one character that gets like actually kind of fleshed out, but honestly that doesn't really happen. There's like one side character that has some growth. There's like a little bit of a character arc, just like the inkling of a character arc that's happening. But otherwise, like everything's about Scorio, and like everything that he does is very predictable, except for the moments where this, you know, your expectations are finally subverted and you're like, yes, something interesting is happening. Something is changing. So that's where a lot of my critique of the characters comes from. There's like these archetypes of, you know, disinterested mentor or supportive friend. And like, there's, you know, a couple characters in each of these categories and they're just like doing their thing. Like Scorio's friend, he has a very supportive friend who is just like the same person throughout the entire book. And it's just like, I want to know more about her, but I don't get to learn anything more about her. It's like, she's written all these journals about her past life. Tell me more about those things. I want to know more about that. There's little bits and pieces, but there's not really enough, I think, throughout the entire book. I will say the main character, Scorio, he is a fun character to be following around. He's a sometimes irrational guy who gets himself into trouble and finds his way out of tricky situations and is able to, you know, do the progression fantasy thing where he's able to acquire power at just the right moment to get through some tricky situations. And sometimes there's a cost to it. The problem again is that he makes the same decisions over and over again. And he like does the same thing all 20 times, except for when he doesn't. And you're finally like, thank you. So it's just like, although he did have an arc, he had a lot of growth throughout the book. It was still hard to just like keep reading him do the same things over and over again. I do think that the characters exploring their past and their trial decisions, which won't make any sense if you haven't read the book, but it's an important plot point that I don't really want to spoil. But these things were very refreshing. It did actually give some depth to the characters, but like we only get the very shallowest. It's like a puddle deep for each character, and I would like to have learned more throughout the, again, 800 pages that like this book was. I also just I had to write down this nitpick while I was reading. There's in like almost every character dialogue, the characters say the word for example, blah blah blah, and that being written down was just really annoying. I know that I'm speaking and saying a lot of ums and ahs, but like in dialogue of a book, I don't care that a character is saying I don't want to read Scorio say I don't know, or I think that's a good idea. It's just like, just delete it. It doesn't need to exist. I also wrote down one of the nights that I was reading, I wrote down in all caps in my notes here, so many conversations with Scorio telling himself, or people telling Scorio that what he wants is impossible, and then Scorio doing it anyways. Please stop. I get it. Again, this happens like 20 times. It just keeps happening over and over and over again, and you know it's going to happen every single time, and it's kind of frustrating. And now onto pacing. I sort of talked about bits and pieces of this throughout this video so far. Again, also rating pacing a 6. Because 666, you know, this is kind of, it takes place in hell. It's funny. But also I think the pacing was disappointing. There's bits of excitement. You know, the beginning of the book is very interesting. There's a big thing that happens in the middle of the book, like almost exactly 400 pages in, which is again interesting. Finally throws something new into the mix, and like the plot kind of changes from that point forward. And then you get kind of nothing again until the last 30 pages, where all of a sudden everything interesting happens that you've been waiting for. Sometimes that's exciting, where like something that you've been waiting for finally happens at the very end of the book. The problem was that like the waiting period again was just a repeat of the same cycles over and over and over again. So overall, the pacing, I think, just it wasn't it wasn't keeping me engaged. Like I was waking up and not really wanting to keep reading, but just being like, I hope, hopefully it's going to pay off. People keep saying good things about it. Like I need to know what's going on. So like honestly, I kind of kept reading more for FOMO than for anything else. Again, the book is about 800 pages. I think the same story could have been told in like 300, without sacrificing any of the plot or any of the character development, because like there's not that much character development outside of Scorio. Within 300 pages, you could have told the exact same story without some of the repeated cycles in between where just like kind of nothing happens. And ultimately for me, that just like points to a book that's poorly paced. There is just a lot of fat that could have been trimmed, because the important bits are very exciting and interesting, but like the things that happen in between the important bits really drag on for way too long. Well, after the like archetype of the character has been established, we know Scorio's an angry guy who acts irrationally. You don't need to show me for the 30th time that he will be angry and act irrationally and get himself into trouble. Like that will happen. We've seen it happen 5 times. I don't care about the 6th time. Just like do something different. And now we get to the ultimate question, which is, will I keep reading the series? Book 2 is called The Rascor Plains, I believe. And I honestly, until this morning, my answer was going to be no. Like I struggled through this book. It was not what I was expecting. I don't want to keep reading. It seems weird to say, but I actually do want to read the second book now. There's actually 2 reasons why. One, I looked up the page count of the second book. It's like 500 pages. So I'm hoping that this means that the pacing improves a lot. I read some of the reviews of book 2 after finishing the book 1 this morning, and people seem to be saying that book 2 improves a lot on the first book. And like there were some similar sentiments that I'm giving now about the first book, that people were saying, book 2 improved a lot of those things and like was a better read. So I'm very much hoping that like the pacing and stuff improves in book 2, and we get maybe some less fat and more meat. The other reason is that I do honestly think that the like subversion of expectations that happens at the very end, at the climax, is actually interesting enough that it sort of turns the book on its head in a way where I do want to know where it goes from here. Like where the book ended is it sort of paints the world in a different light, and I think that I want to explore that light more. I want to explore what that means for like what these characters are going to go through, and also I don't think it's really a spoiler. Book 2 is called The Rascor Plains, which is outside of Bastion. So that means that book 2 is going to take place outside of Bastion. I guess it's not, I don't know if it's a spoiler or not because I haven't read the second book, but I am hoping to see outside of Bastion, because so much of this book is talking about how there's like 10 layers of hell, and at the deepest layer is the pit, and how that's like, if you conquer the pit, you become the Archfiend or the Infernarch or whatever. And like, that's obviously the ultimate mission for these characters, because that's what they're like going through in the academy and blah blah blah. And like I want to know more about that stuff. Like that's the world building that I'm interested in, and I want to know more, and we just don't get a chance to when we're encapsulated within Bastion. So ultimately, I think I talked a lot longer. I'm at 14 minutes now. It's a lot longer than I thought I was going to be, so apologies if I was a little long-winded. Let me know what you guys thought about the book. Let me know what you thought was, if you had problems with the pacing and stuff like I did, or if I'm just like kind of going crazy, maybe I just built up expectations in my mind. In the comments, feel free to let me know that I'm wrong and that I should have liked this book more. That'd be great as well. For anyone who has gotten this far along, I will spoil the next couple books that are on my to be read list. I know some people have been watching my channel because of my Malazan Book of the Fallen reviews. and I will be returning to that shortly. But I do plan on reading Brandon Sanderson's Secret Project #4. I'll be reading that starting tonight. After that, I plan on reading Dungeon Crawler Carl #4. And then I'm going to go into Memories of Ice, which is Malazan Book of the Fallen #3. So that'll probably be a couple weeks from now. I think that Dungeon Crawler Carl will be very fast, and probably so will Brandon Sanderson's books, because I usually get a lot of enjoyment out of them and read them pretty quickly. So I'll be posting reviews for that, for those books in the future. I also am not going to do a book discussion for Bastion, because like, honestly, there's not really a whole lot to discuss, except for just like, I'm interested in knowing what happens in the next book. There's like not a lot of stuff to pick apart, unfortunately. So if anyone is interested in the book discussion, let me know. Maybe it's just something to chat about instead of make a whole video about. But that's it for this one. I'll see you next time.